Welcome to today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagley, and this is the show where we break down what it takes to build elite strength, conditioning, and athleticism for the everyday athlete. Today's episode is all about Strongman-style conditioning, what it is, how it works, and why I use it with everyday athletes who want to build strength, conditioning, and durability all at once. I'll break down the implements and key movement patterns, and walk you through how to actually program this stuff, whether you're in training in your garage, you're in a park, or at your commercial gym. And I'll also share how I think about it, why I believe it's one of the most underutilized tools in fitness, especially for the everyday athlete. Athletes who still want to perform, stay strong, and feel good long term. Now let's go ahead and get into it. Now, when I think about the kind of training that actually makes people better, not just better in the gym, but better in their life, this is it. It's strongman conditioning. And strongman conditioning does not mean flipping tires on the beach, pulling airplanes with a rope from your teeth, hoisting kegs and heavy implements up, over 50-foot, whatever towers. Like, this is not world's strongest man type stuff, but it's just the strongman-like movements. And these are these are at their root functional movements, pushing, pulling, dragging, carrying, and doing this under load and with a purpose. And so conditioning for strongman conditioning is essentially just loaded movement, right? It's lifting like heavy kettlebells and carrying sandbags and awkward objects, like throwing medicine balls, dragging sleds. And it's doing so under that load with time or distance or some type of sustained effort. And this type of training is not going to always be flashy, right? I mean, you can literally carry cinder blocks. We can, hoist heavy sandbags up. It's not going to be flashy. It's not going to be what you see, in your commercial gym with your favorite fitness influencer. And it's not going to be perfect type of training anyways, but it is going to work. I've used this with football players. I've used this with everyday athletes. I've used this with golfers. And this stuff just works because it is so functional. It's a type of training that exists kind of between that strength conditioning. You're getting best of both worlds whenever you're doing this type of stuff. You're not just in the squat rack doing heavy 5 sets of 5 back squats. And you're also not out in the neighborhood or in a park jogging for 45 minutes, either. So this type of work helps to mimic what you do in real life. And what I love most is that it doesn't take any skill to get started. It really doesn't even require much equipment to get started. We'll talk about it later on, but there's just a number of different implements that you can use around your house to do this type of training. And another element, and while technique is important, you don't need perfect technique. You don't need great mobility. You don't need the best equipment. You don't have to go out and get rogue sandbags. You don't have to go out and get, the newest magnetically controlled sled. You just got to train with intent and consistency whenever you're training this way. Now let me paint a picture. You've got a job, maybe kids, and the amount of time that you have available to train is likely limited. You're trying to still stay strong. You want to keep body fat levels low, keep muscle mass high. You want to train for something, maybe some type of a race, or maybe you just want to be able to keep up with your life. And with all of that, you don't want to waste extra time. You don't want to beat yourself up and, you do an hour-long session in the gym and then all of a sudden you're just sore for the next 48, 72 hours. You want to train smart. And this is where strongman-style training, strongman-style conditioning really does shine. With this type of training, obviously you get a huge amount of strength and conditioning in one shot. Walk around with some heavy kettlebells, one in each hand for maybe 200 feet, your heart rate's going to be through the roof. It doesn't even look that hard. And then you get out there and do it. And it is very, very challenging. It also gives you the ability to execute higher outputs with fairly low wear and tear. The movements are fairly short. We're not, some of the sessions can be a little bit longer, but the movements generally are within 30 to 60 seconds. And then we're moving on to the next one. If it's even 30 to 60 seconds, it might even be less than that. You're also going to see massive increases in your grip, in your trunk and trunk musculature, and also your postural and posterior chain strength and endurance. And then another element is just the mental toughness that you build from doing this type of stuff. It's hard. It can be challenging if done correctly. And so it doesn't always have to be, but it can be very challenging. And so, you definitely build that mental toughness component by doing this type of stuff. Now, I want to give you, like a real world example of one of the clients that I've worked with who's, he's a firefighter. He's 42 years old. And if you know firefighters, if you've heard about their types of schedules, they are all over the place in terms of their sleep, calls, meals, training. I mean, you name it. Like there's a lot of unknowns when when it comes to their day to day. And so when he does have time to train, he doesn't always have the luxury of long sessions and extended warm-ups and, let's do a lift session. And then next day, let's do some zone do cardio. Like, there's a lot of days where we've got to kind of get the work done and we've got to get done quickly. And so for him, we do generally 2 lower body sessions per week. And at the end of those sessions, he implements this strongman conditioning. So a simple way that, and this is kind of how we initially, began to program this type of stuff for him, was twice a week after those lower sessions, he would just drag a sled for 10 minutes. We could maybe go heavy on the way down, take off a plate, light and fast on the way back. We would alternate forward and backward drags. So let's drag it down forward, drag it back, backward. We do lateral drags. Those are also included. And then a lot of times I like to use kettlebells here. So now we're doing a carry with a sled drag, just to kind of up it a little bit. And it's fairly simple. But the beauty of this for him is that he's not getting shin splints while doing his conditioning. He's not out running like he was for many years before he started working with me, where his shins were sore, his ankles were sore, his hips and his knees were getting beat up, but he has implemented this and he's still getting brutally fit, right? His performance at work shows he's in better physical shape and internal shape, right? Like he's got better conditioning from this type of stuff, and his life outside the gym has improved as well. I mean, relationship with his family and kids, he's able to do things that frankly were a challenge before. And so this works well for him because it is functional, especially for his job demands. He frequently has to carry heavy objects and pull heavy loads, and he has to be strong while his heart rate is elevated. And so, with the high stress that comes along with it, like he literally has people's lives in his hands. So being able to kind of mimic that in a way through this type of conditioning really, truly does help, some of those, those tactical type of athletes. And his story shows, that you don't need that traditional cardio or more exercises and more CrossFit. You just simply need to get better outputs from your training. And so how do we actually do this type of training? What are the tools? What are the movements? And I want to start with, the pillars surrounding this. These are the pillar movements, right? So number 1 is carries. We can carry a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. We can carry dumbbells, kettlebells, trap bars. We can do farmer's carries where we have a load in each hand. We can do suitcase carries where we've offset the load. We can go overhead. We can go one, overhead and one to the, to that clean catch position. We can go clean catch position, one down to the side. We can alternate it, move it around in a number of different ways. The key with carries is you're holding load and you're moving with it. And it sounds simple, but the benefits, again, stack up fast with this type of stuff. Grip, posture, trunk musculature, shoulders. Like if you want to get a stronger core, do 3 sets of 60-foot suitcase carries with 50 or 70-pound kettlebells on each side. That's going to do a lot more for your trunk and your core than most ab routines are going to do. The second pillar is sled work. Once again, number of ways to skin a cat with this. We can push it. We can drag it. We can sprint with it. We can go forward, backward, side to side. We can go in, serpentine patterns, whatever it is. Like this is the sled in my mind is hands down one of the safest ways to condition the lower body with load. I always say, that the sled gives way more than it takes. The lack of eccentric stress when you're pulling a sled means that you're not going to get as sore and you're going to be able to recover faster from those sessions. However, the lungs are going to burn. The legs are going to burn while you're doing it, and they're going to know what's happening. Number 3 is sandbags. Here we can shoulder the sandbag, we can carry the sandbag, we can squat with it, we can hug it, we can, clean it. Sandbags are awkward. They move and they shift and they shake around, and that's perfect because that forces you to stabilize, forces you to breathe under pressure and move if you're moving with it with a purpose. I recommend for most folks that I work with, who implement this type of training, they generally already have an average to above average level of strength. And so for them, I recommend starting with a 100-pound sandbag. I have a 100-pound and 150-pound sandbag, and I use those kind of interchangeably with different types of workouts, depending on what the end goal is with that session. But with the sandbag, you can just start by picking it up and walking 50 feet for a couple of rounds. You can do 3 to 5 rounds. You can do this after a lower body session. You can do this on a specific strongman day. You can do cleans where you've got the sandbag on the ground in between your feet and you hoist it up off the ground, up above your shoulder, and do, say, 10 reps, 5 to the right, 5 to the left. I also love to program a lot of bear hugs. And basically there you're picking the sandbag up and you're holding it and you're doing it for like a time domain. So 5 sets of 1 minute, or we can accumulate, say, 5 minutes of just holding that sandbag. So we hold it. First set, we get 1 minute and 20 seconds. Then we got to drop it. We rest a little bit, come back, we pick it up and we hold it for 30 seconds. Now we've still got, 3 minutes to go. We've done a total of 2 minutes there. So, we can accumulate time, whatever works, the sandbags will build back strength like no other. And so that is one little element that I, you've got to be kind of careful with because you are picking up a heavy load that's awkward. It's going to be off center a little bit. And so yes, they're going to build incredible back strength, and I really recommend doing them. But if you do have, low back injuries, then just be very aware of how you're picking that sandbag up, how you're moving with it, and that type of stuff. And then the 4th is med balls. So med balls aren't just slams or like wall balls, but we can do throws, rotational work, overhead work, where we throw it over the head, we throw it straight up. I mean, this guy kind of gets you into that this kind of gets you into that keg toss that I was talking about earlier. But here we're probably going a little bit lighter because most med balls or like wall balls weigh, most people have probably a 10-pound, 15-pound, some may have a 40 or a 50, it kind of depends, but you can do a lot of this type of work. And again, med balls are used in, every professional performance facility that I know of has med balls, and that's for a good reason, right? They, transfer incredibly to that athletic on the field performance. They work really well in metabolic circuits. And so med balls are just one of those implements that you've got to have, you've got to know how to use it. And just be aware, like knowing that you can use this type of stuff to get stronger and to get better. You see it, and most of the time people don't even touch it. There's a challenge because you've got to have something to throw it against, or you got to have, an area to throw it. And so getting outside with these types of things definitely helps, but having access to those 4 implements, sleds, some type of carry, some type of med ball, and some type of sandbag, it's going to set you up for success with this style of strongman conditioning. And you don't really need fancy stuff. Like I mentioned, you don't need torque magnet sleds. You don't need rogue sandbags. You don't need, the nicest pair of kettlebells that you can find. You can carry cinder blocks. You can, if you've got heavy dumbbells, use those. If you want to do a heavy, some type of sandbag carry, you can fill up a book bag with books and maybe some weight plates. You can drag a rubber mat with some weight plates on it and a rope tied to it. I've seen people do that, or people even go and like buy plastic sleds. You're good to go with that type of stuff. If you've got something, we can be smart here and try to figure some DIY, solution out to be able to program this type of stuff. So now let's get into the fun part. How do I program strongman conditioning into my programs? Peak Performance uses this. Peak 3X uses this. My tactical training programs use this. My hybrid training programs use this. I love it. Love this type of training. And so here's how I use it in 3 brief ways. One can just be as a simple finisher. This goes back to my firefighter client, right? So we can program this at the end of a strength session. We can knock out a 5 to 10 minute circuit. An example would be like a 40-foot sled push, 50-foot farmer's carry, and 10 sandbag cleans. We do 3 to 4 rounds of that and rest a minute to a minute and a half in between each circuit. That's a nice, simple way to add this to your program already. If you've got a 3 to 4 strength sessions a week, let's toss on, some type of low impact, strongman circuit at the end of that. Second way would be as a standalone strongman session. This is how I primarily will program this type of stuff. You've got a Saturday session. We do a lot of our Thursday sessions include this type of work. I've even replaced lower body days with this style of training because the legs and the posterior chain do get worked a lot during these sessions. So it's easy to kind of replace that there. An example of something like this, we can do like a 100-foot suitcase carry in each arm. We can do a 100-foot backward sled drag. We can do 10 med ball slams and do 3 rounds of that. Again, resting 2 to 3 minutes between those rounds. We can add in battle ropes. We can add in, other types of movements to that type of session. But here we might go a little bit longer. This is more of, generally that aerobic capacity type of work with something like this. And then the third option is as your aerobic or your threshold conditioning. So this is more of that zone 2 tempo work, just with that extra load. So a great example would be like an EMOM 20, where first minute we do a 30-second sled push. Second minute we do a 60-foot farmer's carry. Third minute we do a sandbag bear hug carry. And then minute 4, we rest and then we repeat that 5 times. This type of work adding strongman conditioning to your program is going to build work capacity. It's going to build aerobic output, and it's not totally going to trash your CNS. If we're going really, really heavy, then yeah, you're going to be sore. You're going to be feeling it. You're going to be fatigued. But if you just kind of add some of these implements strategically and without, just diving all in and doing it, as I would say, like incorrectly, you're going to be fine. And if I had to pick one conditioning method for the rest of my life, this is going to be in the top 3. And that's an easy one because it makes you feel strong. The different implements just add that variety. And it's just really nice to be able to feel good and show like this functional side of the training. We always think of like power cleans as functional. I don't really know how functional power cleans are. It just goes back to that CrossFit functional thing. Like a lot of that stuff is not functional at all. Even high rocks, I get it, but how functional really is a burpee broad jump? I've never done that movement naturally in my life. And you're telling me that's a functional movement. I digress. So now let's talk about dialing this in, because while strongman work can be simple in theory, there's a couple of few details that really separate the effective programming from just sweating and working and breathing heavy while carrying around heavy stuff. And the first goes back to that, that fatigue management. You don't want to load it up too soon. I see a lot of people go wrong here. They start off, the first session and they just grab the heaviest kettlebells and they pile 7, 10 plates on the sled, and then they're grinding through different bad positions and they're struggling to walk with the kettlebells. They got to set like that's not the goal. The goal here is not to be world's strongest man. It's not to just move the weight, but to do so well under load. There's a big difference there. The second is respecting your posture. The sleds and the carries, they can be sneaky. You can look strong, but you can overcompensate and compensate in all these different areas all over the place. And so during your heavy carries, right, biggest cue is keep those ribs down, keep those abs tight, act like you're about to get punched in the stomach, keep your spine neutral, and try to control your breathing because you are going to get out of breath doing a heavy kettlebell carry. I've mentioned it, a couple of times now, but you're gonna get out of breath. You're gonna get taxed doing a heavy sled push. And so, yes, while this is called strongman conditioning, it isn't maxing out. We've got to control it. We need to load the movement, but do so under control and with purpose. And that leads us into our third, which is programming with purpose. If you're doing, say 3 rounds of sled pushes, and then you go over and do a med ball circuit, and then you do your carries and then you rest, and all of a sudden you're like, everything's just all over the place, right? You're not really going to build anything. We still got to follow the principles of programming. And so in that instance, like you're just working hard, and there's a lot of times when that is fine, but most of the time it just is not effective. So, make sure that we're still using those general principles of the conditioning methods that we use, right? So time, how are we timing this out? What's the intended effort? What's the distance? Are we using an effort-based interval? And try to keep it honest. Just like with anything, know what system you're training. If we're training strength, are we training speed and power? Are we training, raw max strength? Here, same thing. If we're looking to train the aerobic system, then let's program accordingly. If we're looking to train the glycolytic system, then let's do so accordingly. Make sure that we're programming appropriate for whatever the intended outcome is. And last, don't treat this like punishment. This is training. We're not doing boot camp. I've written a blog post on this about Navy SEAL training. Like this kind of feeds into that a little bit. This is not that. You're not here to just gas yourself out and smoke yourself. You should be, using your conditioning to get better on the field, in life, heavy under load, like in the gym, whatever it is, ultimately that your goal is, you should be training for an intended outcome. And so make sure that you're focusing on that and not just training really hard to train really, really hard. And then ultimately you wear out, you burn out, like all these other things. So now I want to get into this because the part that I truly care most about is that this style of conditioning isn't just training. This leads back to what it means to be an everyday athlete. If you have kids, this is about being able to carry your kids when they're, you're 2 miles into a hike and they're tired and you got a 45-pound kid that you now have to carry back out of the trail for 2 miles. And is your back going to blow up, right? You've trained for that type of stuff. If you have a yard and you like to work in the yard like I do, like you can drag mulch bags across the yard and not be so dang sore the next day that you got to take painkillers, just to be able to fall asleep or just to be able to get through your day, whatever it is. And it's also having confidence. Not only are you going to look fit, but you're going to know in your mind that you're capable of being able to lift heavy stuff, move with it, and do so well. So whenever I train this way, I feel more athletic. I feel more durable. And honestly, I truly do feel like more alive with this type of stuff because this is what leads to that outside of the gym. This is that everyday athlete element of it. There for a while, one of my kind of internal goals was to just train to be gas station ready. And this leads into that, right? If I got attacked at a gas station, and I know this sounds silly. I've told this before to a lot of people and people tend to laugh, but if I were ever attacked in a gas station, like, can I defend myself? Could I fight off an attack? And like, I'm not an MMA fighter. This isn't MMA conditioning or boxing training, but still just having this like functional strength that can be applied outside of the gym, I think it's a huge game changer. So, to wrap it up, I just want to, first I want to say that I appreciate y'all for listening. If you've ever done strongman-style conditioning, I highly recommend giving this a try. You can implement it literally this week using some of the finisher methods. Pick one movement, pick a couple movements. You can carry some kettlebells for distance. You can push some sleds if you have access to them, do some intervals with those. If you're looking to develop real world, conditioning, almost elite level conditioning, then this, I believe, should be part of your system. And so in my programming, we use it all the time. All of my programs are available on Train Heroic. And so, like I mentioned, every program that's currently available on there has throughout the year at least 2 to 3 4-week blocks of strongman conditioning and included throughout the year. And so if you're ready to train, with purpose and try this type of work, then check those out at HagleyStrength.com, or you can go into the Train Heroic marketplace and find those programs there. Like I said, Peak Performance and the Peak 3X program. And with that, that is all for today. I appreciate you all for listening, and I will see you in the next one. That's it for today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. If you got value from this, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who would benefit. And if you want more insights, exclusive training tips, and in-depth breakdowns of the latest research in strength conditioning, join my Performance Edge newsletter. It's my free weekly email where I cut through the noise and break down what actually works in training, nutrition, and performance. Sign up today at HagleyStrength.com. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you next time.